Dear colleagues, dear friends, it's my pleasure to introduce you Dirk Siepmann, who is professor for English language teaching at Osnabrück University, Germany. His areas of expertise are academic writing, teacher training, corpus construction, glossaries and dictionaries, as well as evaluation of language courses. His experience in applied linguistics and language teaching spans over 15 years. He received his first university degree in English, French, and Italian languages and literatures at the University of Bochum, Germany. He also studied for 9 months at the University of Durham, Great Britain. In 2003, he received his PhD at the University of Wuppertal, and his doctoral thesis was dedicated to functional taxonomy of multi-word discourse markers in English, French, and German texts. Since November 2006, he has been a professor in the Institute of English and American Studies at Osnabrück University. He is the author and co-author of 5 books dedicated to translation studies, language teaching, and contrastive text analysis, and of 2 dictionaries. He has also published over 30 articles on language teaching, academic writing, translation studies, and lexicography. Enjoy the lecture.
Thanks for the great introduction. I'm still blushing. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to talk about our writing textbook here in Helsinki, and I hope the book may also prove useful to Finnish learners. I've brought a few copies of the book with me, which I like to pass these things around, and if you fancy having a little read and a little listen, that's perfectly okay. As you can see, it's quite a thick volume, so I'll only be able to scrape the surface of what the book offers. There's a vast amount of detail in the book, obviously, and I can only talk about some facets of this vast amount of detail. My talk is in 2 parts. The introductory part will be quite short. I'll talk a bit about the starting point, the target audience, the authors of the book, and so on, and then I'll go into some detail on the various modules that the book is composed of. It's a book that's based on a modular structure, 4 different modules, as you'll see in a minute. Now, it's probably a good idea to start this talk by briefly giving you some background on the status accorded to language teaching in German universities. Now, the assumption in our book is that advanced language teaching is concerned with a complex process of guided activity involving constant revision and refinement, whereby the student is required to be at the same time creative and critical. At all events, it's a process that is no less intellectual than that involved in acquiring academic skills, and it can by no means be described as purely practical. So this is the conception of language teaching that underlies our writing book. Our main premise is that linguistics and advanced language work are inseparable from each other, and we've used whatever linguistic sources and resources were available to us. Among other things, a 200 million word web corpus of academic writing, which I originally compiled for my doctoral thesis, and which we have added to over the years. We have also drawn on the ICL corpus, the Louvain-based ICL corpus compiled by Sylviane Granger, which some of you may be familiar with, and our own collections of non-native writing. So we also analyzed non-native writing. We compared native with non-native writing, and didn't just look at error analysis, but also at typical phenomena of overrepresentation and underrepresentation in learner texts. We call these missed opportunities. We've also looked at studies on contrastive rhetoric in the Anglo-American tradition and contrastive linguistics in the European tradition, special language and stylistics. We also included traditional English style guides or American style guides on English rather than English in the sense of British. And we also looked at research on the writing process. What was controversial here, of course, is the role of translation. Perhaps Germany is a special case here, since we thought that translation is still unavoidable in the writing process of a German learner, because German learners often draw on secondary literature that is in German. And this often leads to the necessity of having to translate words or phrases into English. Whereas perhaps in some other cultures, we had a dispute on this actually. One of my co-authors who works in the Netherlands said that this is no longer necessary in the Netherlands because all of the secondary literature is already in English in the Netherlands. But in Germany, I think we find that the writing process is still partly based on translating from German into English. And we can't really avoid that, although we encourage learners to write in English from the start, but occasionally there may be the odd phrase that needs to be translated, and that's something we've taken account of. Now, from the practitioner's perspective, the problem with linguistic research is, of course, that it's never exhaustive. It only deals with small aspects of the language system that may help refine linguistic theory, but this theory is usually so fragmentary that it can never have any predictive force for the writer. But that's exactly what the non-native writer or translator would need. Now, another crucial question that needs to be answered by any author of a writing textbook is, of course, do texts written by non-native speakers need to be fully idiomatic? Now, the empirical answer here is clearly no. If you look at books published, for instance, by Mouton de Gruyter in Berlin, you'll see that I'd say most of these texts are at least slightly unidiomatic. Some are even terribly unidiomatic. We decided that we should still strive for a fully idiomatic style in English, because if you allow non-native writers to write unidiomatically, you end up with texts that might be literal translations from the language of the author concerned, and then the reader most competent to unravel the meaning is the one who can first translate them back into that language. Yeah? So our answer here is there's a very weak case for norm infringements, because once you start turning a blind eye to them, it's difficult to say where to draw the line. And there's also pedagogic reason for our uncompromising stance on conformity to the norms applied by native users, and that's the age-old pedagogy insight that the lower you set your sights, the less you will ultimately achieve. So our stance is that we should not abandon the aim of attaining near nativeness and full idiomaticity, because otherwise competence levels will simply continue to slide downwards. So we've made no concessions on this point. We've also tried to include some of the main learning psychological features that we find in the literature such as Siepmann 1985, on the structure of effective textbooks, strategy orientation, awareness raising, advanced organizers and summaries. We try to exemplify as much as possible. The book is organized in a modular way, so you can dip into individual modules, or you can read the book from cover to cover. There's usually a structure from general to specific. We try to justify norms functionally. We don't try to be prescriptive. We always try to give reasons for particular stylistic or linguistic decisions. There's a 100-page dictionary component, which we'll look at in some detail in a moment. There are tables and graphs, a glossary, and exercises, not in the book itself, but on the accompanying website, which you might also be able, or which you can also access from Finland, obviously. So you can have a look at the exercises without buying the book. The target audience is students of English, researchers in other disciplines, and also teachers and gifted learners in the senior years of German grammar schools, or grammar schools generally, not just German grammar schools. Gifted learners at what you might call sixth form level in a British context. Brief look at the authors. These are the only multimedia elements in this talk. Professor Mike Hannay is Professor of English Language at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. He's also the head of the Department of Language and Communication there, and his research interests are functional discourse grammar, contrastive linguistics, and learner language, and he's also the editor of the Vandalen dictionaries, the big English-Dutch dictionaries. Professor Lachlan Mackenzie, he was full professor in English language at the VU at Amsterdam from 1987 to 2004. He's now honorary professor at that university, and he's a freelance linguistic consultant at the moment, but still based in Lisbon at the ILTC Institute, and editor of Functions of Language. And John Desmond Gallagher, he's got no photo on the internet, so can't show him, a freelance translator and lecturer at Münster University. Okay, that's the introductory part. I now come to the structure of the book itself, and I'll show you examples from individual modules. Module 1 is entitled Organizing Ideas into Text. So it's basically about text organization from the text level downwards, you might say, to the paragraph level. Module 2 is about building effective sentences. That's Mike Hannay's specialty, and he basically produced most of that module. Lexis and grammar, module 3. This is the dictionary component, but also some more general information on how to form word groups in English, how to nominalize in English. We'll see that in a minute. And module 4 on style is about academic style, the kind of style that any academic writer needs to master, but also about personal style for those people who are more advanced and want to carve out a personalized, individualized style. Brief look at module 1, because this is the most traditional module. There's a focus here, strong focus on term papers and research papers. We emphasize differences in discourse traditions between German-speaking countries and English-speaking countries. There's a great tradition in Germany of reader responsibility. The German professor expects his reader to somehow muddle through his or her text, whereas the English writer usually provides a clear, linear order. Usually the text is extremely well planned and so on. You probably know this from research by Klein and other Australians. So this is something that German learners do not get right automatically. They need to be taught the differences in text structure. We also provide paragraph models. We introduce the notion of the topic sentence and provide various paragraph models for different types of elaboration. For instance, analytical paragraphs, deductive paragraphs, inductive paragraphs, dialectical paragraphs, and so on. We also provide information on the choice of titles, how to select the best possible title